Okay, we are live, it looks like. So hello everybody. I'm just going to wait a few more minutes to make sure that everybody has a bit of time to come into the room. But for everybody who is here and on time, thank you so much. It's so nice to be doing this workshop for you guys. So it is really all about UX and UI design today. I'm going to go over to the slides. So I've got a bit of a slideshow, and there will be worksheets as well that I'll provide at the end. So there'll be a link if you stay towards the end for the worksheets, and they're really good and actionable ones because I want you to be able to take on board what you learned today and actually apply it to your business as well. Just let me know if you can hear me in the chat okay, and for everybody who is here already, say hi. So you can just pop a question or pop your message in the chat box. For all messages, I will check back periodically throughout the presentation, but for any questions, I'll leave them towards the end. And then if you have any further questions, we can definitely cover that because there is time at the end to do so as well. So let me know where you're from and what kind of business you have. Have you used, hi Matt, have you looked into UX or UI design in the past? Is this something that you're familiar with, or is this something that's really new to you that you're excited to learn about? Hi, Carrie, it's nice to see you. Hopefully everyone's keeping warm today. All right, so while we wait for a few other people to pop in, I'm going to start the presentation and we'll start moving through the slides. So great. Hi, Shiva. Nice to see you. And if you have any initial questions about UX or UI, let me know as well, because I can keep that in mind and we can definitely cover that towards the end of the presentation. All right, great. So as I mentioned before, we're going to be talking about the fundamentals for a knockout website. So this is really a very practical workshop because I want you to be able to take what you learn and apply it to your workshops. So there's lots of examples along the way. And it is part of the ASBAS Digital Solutions program. So we do have a wide range of workshops available. There's webinars and online materials. So if you haven't already considered doing some paid mentoring, it's such a valuable resource for $25 for 2 hours. That's how I found out about ASBAS, is because I did 4 hours of mentoring and it helped so much for my business. So I really recommend it. So there's lots of mentors available and there are still lots of spots. But you do need to get in early or quickly because there are limited spots for various mentors. And hello everybody, I'm Jo Chanyan. I am a brand designer, I'm a coach, and I'm also an author. I work primarily with small businesses in food, wellness, and the holistic space. And before I became a brand designer, I actually went to chemical engineering. So I have a very practical, logical, methodical way of processing information. And I ended up doing marketing, branding, product and packaging development, which is all about solving problems as well. And I worked with global companies and brands such as Unilever, Twinings, and Loving Earth. And over the years, I've discovered that I really love working with small businesses versus big global brands. So I decided to go out on my own after spending some time in Japan, and I founded my own business. So I run a branding design studio. So it's just me at the moment, but hopefully I'll expand in future. But I work with lots of clients in Australia and overseas as well. And just look out for the free worksheets at the end. So they will help you actually integrate a lot of this information that we'll learn today. So hi, Andrew. Hi, Dean. Looking forward to the presentation. Great. Okay, awesome. So Andrew offers very friendly video productions in West Melbourne. That's awesome. Elizabeth, hello. Greetings on this grey morning. I know it's really not the best morning. From Heidelberg West. She has a private practice and she is all about sustaining the spirit space. Oh, that sounds really interesting. She accompanies people as they discern meaning and purpose. Oh, I love that. All right, excellent. Thank you so much, everybody. Okay, great. So what we'll learn and what we'll cover today is really what UX is and what UI is and why it's important for your business. And actually, the big chunk of the material today is all about how to use UX and UI thinking when it comes to designing and applying it to your website. So does everybody have a website at the moment that they're using to run their business from? Or it could be just a landing page or a home page. It doesn't have to be a full website. It could just be one page and that's still considered a website. So UX design is actually called user experience. So that's where the U is, and then the X is the experience. So it's all about the user experience when it comes to your website and how people actually move through your site. And when we're looking at user experience, the things that we typically explore is the interactions. So things like the buttons, the navigation bar, forms, opt-ins, anything where people are clicking on your website, that is part of the interactions. The user journey is how they're actually clicking from one place to another or where their eye is going, where they're actually stopping to read, what kind of information they're going to next, where they want to get to. And your user personas is the people that are coming to your site. So is this your ideal client or is this a prospective client? Is this someone that is a repeat customer? So you may have for your website and for your business different user personas. So that's important to keep a note of, because your website sometimes doesn't really just work for one person. It needs to kind of think about how it's actually going to guide different people through the website. If someone's looking for something to do with your product, how are they going to be guided there versus someone who's looking to contact you or get in touch for an inquiry? So those are the different user personas. So that covers what user experience or UX design is on a very simplistic, basic level. So we'll drill down a little bit from there as we go along. But really, UX design is something that happens at the beginning of the design process. So I want you to start thinking about this, even if you've got an existing website, think about the experience of it first before you move in to making it look pretty and beautiful. So UX is all about making things usable, accessible, and functional. And it is about finding a solution to a problem in your business, product, or service. And Don Norman, who is a prolific author and professor in design, talks about UX in a way where he says, UX is the way you experience the service. It's a system that is everything. So it is almost that ecosystem of how people understand how to interact with your brand and your business when it comes to your website or when it comes to an app. But for today, we're going to look at it in context of websites first. And then UI design. So sometimes UX and UI are used really interchangeably, but it's really good to know the difference between the two. So your UI design is the user interface. So the interface is really all about the visual design. So this is where you can get a little bit creative in making things look aesthetically pleasing. This is where your brand identity comes from. So that's the personality of your brand can come out through your user interface. And it's a little bit about the layout as well. The layout kind of works for both UX and UI, but primarily with alignment of text and things like that, UI is it's really something that the UI designers tend to look at a lot more than the UX designers. So that's looking at the aesthetics of the layout. And the UI design is a process that happens typically towards the end of the design process because you've already solved the problem. This is how you're delivering the solution. And the objective is to make things visually appealing and precise. And it's to create that cohesive visual design language so that people know what to expect from your brand. It's all about connecting with your user or your customer, your client, in an emotional way to make the best emotional impression. And then the difference between the two, this is how they kind of link together. They actually link together through the wireframes and the layout. So they share similar similarities. So often the UX designer will determine the interactions, the user journey, the personas, and then they'll start working on the wireframes. And then the wireframes is basically the layout of the site. And then the UI design process will start by taking those wireframes and the layout and start filling in all of the spaces around that. So it'll tweak the layout in a way that's visually appealing, that's really anchored into your brand and gives it that style and the visual aesthetics that it needs to. So the wireframes and the layout is where the two are sort of blended together. But traditionally with UX and UI designers, they tend to work together on pretty much most aspects of a project. They'll always be checking in with each other because they need to work together to produce the final result. But for today's conversation and for today's workshop, I really want to look at how we can actually do that ourselves if we don't have a UX design or a UI design team. How can we actually implement some of this thinking in our own business without an agency team? It might be something that you consider doing in future, but I think this is the aim of this workshop is really for you to understand the fundamentals and for you to start applying some of those in ways that you might be able to your business now. So why is UX and UI important for the success of your business? Well, your business is really dependent on the holistic experience that you offer to your customers. It's that human to human connection. And if something doesn't really feel right, most customers will actually decide to go elsewhere if they have a negative UX experience because there is a lack of trust that they're getting from your website. So this is when people might click off. This is when people might look at reviews and make a different decision versus working with you or purchasing from you. So having a really smooth and intentional UX and UI kind of puts your products, your offerings, and your business in its best light so that your user can then pick it up and really see how it can benefit their own lives as well. So this is how you can serve at your best, essentially. And businesses that utilize UX and UI design in their strategy are more likely to create that emotional connection. It's more of a personalized experience because they've thought about the people that are going to be clicking on their website and what they might be looking for. It also increases brand recognition and awareness because you become known as a brand that has a cohesive ecosystem, and it leads to increased conversions and sales. They say that in some cases, just changing the button color can mean the difference between, it leads to like a 400% increase in sales. There have been lots of reports about that for established companies that have made little tweaks and it's led to really big results. So even something as small as the link color or the button color, or where you're putting your buttons on your page and how you're creating a navigation, all of those things can actually increase conversions and sales for your business. Great. And then, hello, Delhi. Delhi is from Fluffy Tales, New Pet Accessories and Small Businesses. Great. I'm just checking in on the chat. Awesome. Okay, so 88% of people are less likely to return to a site after they've had a negative user experience. So that's why it's really good to think about user experience first before it comes to designing your website. And the other aspect of it is part of running a business is that we are always wanting to continuously improve our offerings and refine how we serve the people that we do. So it's all about knowing that there is going to be continuous room for development and improvement on our customer facing and internal facing processes, as well as our services and our products. So UX and thinking about it in this way actually helps us diagnose problems and solve them so that we're always creating change and positive evolutions forwards for our business. So how do we actually start applying UX, UI, and fundamentals to our website? Well, at the start, there's 4 steps for UX and UI design. So we want to first look at defining and researching the problem. And then the second step is where a lot of that ideation and creativity comes into place. So that's ideation and brainstorming. And the third stage, or the third step, is design and prototyping. And the fourth stage is testing and refinement. So these are the 4 steps for UX and UI design. So if you need to take notes, that's fine. Just know that you'll get the notes at the end of this workshop as well. So the first stage, defining the problem. What do your users want but aren't getting? So how can you actually see? This step is really about understanding what the biggest challenge you might have for your website is. So what are your users wanting but aren't getting, or aren't getting to the point where they're 100% satisfied with that experience or that offering? And this is in the context of your website. So it might be later down the track, it might be an offering challenge, or it might be something that you need to work on in your business with your admin or your processes. But for this specific example, because we're applying it to the website, it's really about looking at where you are falling short on your website in terms of helping people get in contact with you or purchase a product. So define your users' top objectives and their user journey. So what is your user's persona? This sounds a lot more complicated than it is, but it's really asking the question of who is it that's coming to your site? What are they looking for? And what do they want to click on? What are the things that they need to get from your site before they actually decide to purchase from you, get in touch, or want to work with you? And also it goes back to your business objectives too, because it's also, what do you want them to do? Like, what do you want them to get from landing on your website? And what is their preferred, what is their preferred solution or experience? So what would they like instead? So this is the ideal solution. Do they want something that's easy, quick, simple? Are they feeling overwhelmed with the amount of content? Do they not know where to click? What would they click on first, second, or third? So what's that order? So this is really understanding how they're going to your website and how they're actually navigating around the page. What info would they need to take before taking, what information would they need before taking action? So what do you need to tell them before they actually take the call to action that you want them to take? So it might be having a FAQ, or it might be having a little bit more information about your services, or it might be showing the pricing, for example. So have a think about these in terms of the prompts for your website. And this will help you define your users' top objectives and their user journey. So in the worksheets, we actually go a little bit further into depth, and you can actually unpick some of your biggest challenges with your website with further questions as well. So as an example, I wanted to take you through one of my projects that I did for myself recently. I did my own website redesign, and it was really interesting because I found that there was an issue with people knowing where to click and actually getting stuck on my website. So this is how I've done steps 1 to 4, essentially. I'm just going to take you through that. So this was the initial sort of chunk of my website at the beginning, before I did my website redesign. So it has a little bit of text. The main thing here that I'm seeing is that there's no real distinction between the colors of the buttons, so people don't really know what's important. So when I was diagnosing and researching the problem, I found that people didn't really know where to click. And when they did click on the work with me or get in touch, they were greeted by this a lot of information. So I was asking them to fill in a lot of information before they even got to book in a call. So this was deliberate in the past because I got a lot of people just booking in spots and not turning up. So I wanted to make sure that I was vetting potential clients a little bit more before they could book in a call. But this was actually quite overwhelming, and it became a deterrent for people to get in contact with me. And sometimes you need to get in contact with someone first to be able to see whether you want to work with each other. So this was a problem that I was seeing happening in my own website. So when I was defining the problem, I was seeing that there weren't enough people signing up to book a call or to a free chat. I don't know why it got cut off here. Apologies for that. And then when I was doing some quantitative research, I realized that 70% of visitors aren't actually clicking up on a sign-up form to book in a chat. Visitors are only staying for about 7 seconds before clicking off the page. 80% of visitors are clicking on other buttons instead of booking up or signing up for a call. And the qualitative information is that it's not clear where people can find the sign-up form because of the buttons. Visitors don't feel ready to sign up for a free consult because there wasn't enough information beforehand. And visitors are overwhelmed by the amount of questions that I was asking them as well, rightfully so. And this is just an example of a very quick overall definition of the problem and researching it as well. So the way that I did the research was looking at some of the website analytics where people are clicking, and also what you could do is a qualitative analysis as well, where you actually ask people coming to your site, or it might be your ideal clients, what their experience is. So you can use an online survey, such as have a poll on Instagram or Facebook or on your website even. You could use SurveyMonkey. Typeform is another good one, just to get some written qualitative information from people. Reviews, testimonials, feedback forms, all of those things will help you create a little bit more basis for your research. And analytics from your website, from Google Analytics, TreeJack, which shows whether people can understand the categories and the navigational structure of your website, is really good to check out as well. And Hotjar for mapping out where people are clicking is a good one as well to look into. And then obviously interviews such as Zoom, having a phone call with someone or asking them in person is going to be really good. So this, depending on how deep you want to go into the research, these are some of the other options. But I suspect for most of us, we probably have a good understanding of what's working in our business and what might not be working intuitively. But I would always recommend, if you needed more information and it wasn't really clear, it would be really great to do a little bit more online surveys, analytics, and interviews as well, just to get all the information you need. So in companies where they do have UX and UI designers, they actually spend a lot of time in research. So the research and the data collection is really important. So best practices is to be specific with the questions that you ask in your UX questionnaires. So it will really help you define the problem that you have. So keep it specific to that, make it easy for people to answer the question, and limit your choices by creating a few options. So don't give people too many options, because that's just going to be a little bit overwhelming. Great. So the next step is around ideation and brainstorming. This is where the interesting stuff starts to happen, I find, because you can start to find certain solutions for your problem. So you're going to start brainstorming some of the things that are going to help make that user experience a little better, or you're going to resolve the issue as best as you can. So for me, when it came to understanding what those ideas could be and brainstorming, I found that maybe I had to make the process for signing up really simple and easy. I had to make the button color distinctive and different. I had to make it the #1 call to action on my website. So everything that I spoke about had to navigate or guide people towards booking a call, because that's the #1 purpose of my website. And overall, in order to overcome some of their objections of not knowing what I did or not really understanding whether they were the right fit, I had to create trust. So that would be created via having an opt-in, having testimonials really front and center, showing my portfolio of work and being very clear with my process. So for you, obviously that will be different, but I think trust is definitely something that's really key to think about when it comes to your homepage and all of the other pages as well. Trust is super important because it answers a lot of objections that people might have. So best practices is to get quick prompts to get you thinking about a positive solution or idea, and you're going to rank them in terms of effort and impact on a Eisenhower matrix if you use that. This is an example of the Eisenhower matrix. So when I actually go through it and do it myself, I can see which of those ideas are going to have the biggest impact on my business and which are going to have maybe the lowest impact and maybe require the most amount of effort. So this helps you prioritize, and it helps you understand which are the top things that you need to work on when it comes to your website, because maybe there's lots of changes that you want to make. So as an example, this was what it looked like for me when I started prioritizing my matrix and plotting everything down. I realized that the major projects for me was actually to redesign a big chunk of my website. So I needed a really strong portfolio. I needed strong testimonials and a good space around them, so it's really clear. Because it wasn't on my original website, I had to really define the process in a simple and easy to understand way on the homepage. And I had to have a strong opt-in so people could actually develop trust over time if they didn't feel like they wanted to work with me initially. The call to action, or CTA, was the focus. So I would have those in various positions in my website, which I'll show you in a bit, and having different colored buttons for different things as well. So everyone would see that there was one clear button that they had to press versus a link that would take them somewhere else. So it's all about creating a bit of hierarchy there. And then some of the other quick wins that didn't require as much effort as redesigning a complete website were automating some of those onboarding signups using Zapier and Dubsado. So that whole process is automated and really smooth, so people aren't waiting for me to get back to them if they sign up to book a call. They get all the prompts, they get everything booked in, and they get the next steps that they need to make. So it's really clear what they need to do next. So that was really helpful to understand where all of my different tasks needed to fit. And then we go into design and prototyping. So this is the third stage, is really around creating rough wireframes for your website. So you're planning out your ideas and solutions, but you're actually giving them a bit more of a visual, giving them a bit more visual direction in terms of where everything needs to go. So this is where in UX design, you'll start doing the site mapping, the wireframes, the navigation structure, creating some of the basic layouts for where your content is going to go, and understanding what every interaction is going to, the path for each interaction, essentially. If you click on a button, where does it go? If you have a form, where does it link to? What that whole experience is going to feel like. So you're always going to design this with your user's journey in mind. So keep your user persona and keep your user journey in mind when you're designing anything when it comes to your website. So as an example of what a sitemap is, this is an example of one of the ones that I've created for a client in the past. So they'll have their home page, their about page, resources, offerings. And then it's really simply about understanding what is going to go into every page. So you know that there is going to be a header banner, there's going to be a tagline, a call to action, a button, a blog post. You're going to have different things like a free opt-in. Just gives you a little bit more structure so that you can see the overall layout of your page and it doesn't feel so overwhelming when you're going into design. This is another example of a wireframe. So wireframes don't need to be overly complicated. They can be very quick. They can be something that you draw yourself, but it's really about understanding where all the different things are going to be located in each page. This is the wireframe. The sitemap looks at the whole site and what goes into each page. The wireframe then looks at the overall layout of the page itself. So these boxes with the cross in them denotes an image. And then she's got a little bit of text on the left of that. She's got a button underneath the image. She's got a bit of movement. So there is a bit of a bit of planning here to understand exactly what's happening when people see this page. But it's really rough, right? It doesn't really need to take that much time at all. You can go and make it look a little bit prettier by doing it online as well. So if you're using Miro is a great tool online that you could use to plan out a wireframe very easily for your website. So I would check that out if you need to do so. And going back to the example of what my homepage looked like and that whole mess of interactions there, I started to look at the homepage and break it down in terms of a wireframe. So this is what I've done. Very, very simple, very quick and easy. Not very pretty at all, but I have a designated location for things like the nav bar, the hero section, the introduction, testimonials, portfolio, process, opt-in, and the footer. So just a few things here. It's called Miro. So M-I-R-O for the wireframes, Joyce. Great. And then when we're moving from wireframing to actual design, so this is the next step. This is actually not actually full design yet, but I'm starting to fill in some of these boxes with some of the content, with an image here and there. There's lots of images like the brown boxes. At that point were missing because I didn't have the images done as yet, but you can kind of see how things are coming together in a way where it's starting to look like a website. It's starting to make sense. I have buttons in place. I have a place for testimonials. I have a place that that has images of the work that I do. So this gives your wireframe, and it takes it to the next level. It takes it to the next stage where you're starting to add some of that content and detail in. So this is something that I do for my clients as well. We do this in Adobe XD. The free option for this would be Figma. So Figma is Figma, and that's a free program that allows you to design a lot of things, anything from websites to apps and interfaces. It's a interface design app, similar to Illustrator or Adobe XD if you've used that in the past. So the best practice, I wanted to talk about the homepage a little bit because this is really key. So 46% of online shoppers list not being able to tell what a company does as the reason for leaving a website. So what that really means is that you need to include what it is that you do at the top of the fold on your homepage. The top of the fold is that part where on your first bit, I don't know if I can, I can't annotate on this, but it's that big olive box that you see on this page. That would be the top of the fold. That's the thing that they would see as soon as they click onto the page. That's the first thing that they see, and it's the first thing that takes up the screen. You need to get what it is that you do across within that box. And that helps people understand that they're in the right place. And if you're putting that until a little bit later, it's probably going to be too late and people are going to click off the website. So top of the fold for really important key information about what it is that you do. And then after landing on a homepage, 86% of users are looking for products and services. So what that means is that your button for products and services need to be very prominent and clear and accessible. 62% are interested in contact information and 52% are looking for the About Us section. So based on this, you can see the priorities that a lot of users may be looking for when they're coming to your website. But keep in mind that this may be really different for your business. So it's good to understand exactly what your users are coming to your page for. These are just generic figures, but it's just good to keep in mind as well. So as a summary of what we've just said, users come to your homepage to understand what it is that you do. So you want to create a smooth user experience with the clear call to action for your page, such as your buttons and your links that will direct people to maybe your services and products, your contact us, and your about page, if that is what's true for your business. And then this is when we can start to move further into UI design. We start to look at the branding aspect of things. So your fonts, colors, icons, imagery, look and feel, and copy. So again, the apps that I use for this is, you could use Sketch, Figma, Adobe XD. Figma is free. And Adobe XD is free as well to a certain extent. Figma has a paid plan, but those are two very good options. The alternative, if you don't want to use any of those to design your page, is that you could actually do it in terms of screenshots. Take screenshots of your website, print them out, and make changes on notes on what needs to be changed. This is going to be a little bit more hands-on, and it does take a bit of time, where regardless of whether you're using Figma, Adobe XD, or whether you're doing screenshots, because UI does take a bit of time to work out, but it would be great to have the screenshots of your existing website so you know what you're working with. So this is an example, it's a very blurry example of my website after I went through the design phase. So I've just highlighted a few things here. The main thing is that I've got the green circle denotes where the button is. So that it's very blurry, but what it says is book your discovery call. I want to make sure that if people are looking on the navigation bar, that is the first thing that really pops out at them. The other links says coaching and branding. They're not in a bubble and they're not in a button. So immediately for a user, it's going to create the impression that the hierarchy of those links is less. So you really want to elevate the things that are important and de-escalate or de-elevate the things that are less important on your website. So that's why the button for book your discovery call, the main call to action for my site, is really clear. And then I have my hero header with a intro on what I do and a call to action as well. And then when I go down a little bit more, there is another call to action again. So again, it's the same thing. It says the same thing. It says book your discovery call. So making it prominent on different parts of your page is really key here as part of the design. And then we go into testimonials. I have a large section for testimonials because I wanted that to take up a bit of space. As soon as people understand what they're coming to the site for, I want them to see the testimonials. And then I want them to understand and see the work that I've done. So that's really building trust. So if you have a service-based business, you should be putting your testimonials up front and center. And then maybe it's about putting some of the work that you do or images of the work that you do, the services that you provide, the products that you offer underneath that as well. And then again, I have another call to action in the portfolio. So the same button of book your free discovery call. So it's really guided. This website has been specifically created so that people can't click on they can click on different things, but the one thing that I want them to click on is a repeated structure of that same button with the same messaging. So that consistency creates this familiarity in people's minds. And when you create familiarity, it creates trust. So people are more likely to click on something. And then I go into the branding process. So a little bit more information. So that answers people's questions and objectives and explains the process. I have a bit of a quote just because I like the look of the quote. And I have a little bit more at the bottom where I list the clients that I've worked with. And again, that is all about creating trust. So the two purposes for this homepage is trust and the call to action of book your discovery call. And then it goes into the booking form. So this was something that I ummed and ahed about for a while because I wanted people to come through and be able to book straight away, because the original process of them clicking on a button, going to a separate page and filling out a really detailed form was a barrier to them booking a call to get on the phone with me. So this is why I've created a form on that page. So as soon as they go down to the bottom, they're able to click the book here button and make that booking right there on the page without going anywhere else. There is also an opt-in. If people feel like they're not ready, they can sign up for other free resources. So I have a few opt-ins there, and then I have the footer for the page. So hopefully that helps you grasp the context of the homepage and some of the design decisions that I've used along the way to structure it in the way that I have. So everything's very intentional about the design. It's very functional, it's practical, it's strategic. So hopefully you can see how going through the UX process at the very beginning has helped me create that structure and guide people through that page in a way where I know it's going to really work. So e-commerce platform. So Deli's just asked which e-commerce platform platform do I recommend? I would say if you have a lot of products, you're probably best using Shopify for your e-commerce platform. I don't have a lot of products, so I am happy to stick with Webflow. That's what I design in. I also design in Squarespace for clients. But yeah, if it's e-commerce, lots of products, definitely Shopify, just because it gives you the options. And Matt has kindly shared the Miro.com link in the chat, so you can access the Miro app as well for you to plan your wireframes as well, which is really helpful. Okay, great. Joyce has said she uses WordPress and WooCommerce plugin. Great. All right. So yeah, so Delhi, I use on Webflow, there is an option for, so it's not Wix, it's Webflow. And Webflow has a shopping or a product option. But for me at this stage, it's not a big part of my business. I don't offer like products, I offer services. And so that isn't really something that is necessary for my business personally. But yeah, if it is part of your business, I would definitely advise choosing a platform that really helps you specifically with products, if that's a big part of your business, if you have a product-based business. So the nav menu is about understanding how your user will want to navigate your site. So these are some of the prompts to consider when designing your navigation bar. So this is the bar up the top. Sometimes there's also a hamburger icon, which allows you to click and it becomes a slide menu. So you want to ask yourself, what menu items need to be grouped together? And would it work better in a drop-down folder, or whether it would work better as single individual menu items? And what menu items are primary navigation items? What menu items are secondary navigation items? And what menu items can actually go in the footer? So answering some of these prompts will help you decide what actually you're going to put in different areas when it comes to navigation. Because when you have too many options in your navigation bar, that can look quite cluttered and a little bit overwhelming. So you want to create a few options where people are clicking on things in a way that they expect, or in a way where they want more information. So they're going to click down, it's going to drop down into something further versus showing all the options at once. So here's a few examples. So as I spoke about before, I have my primary navigation button, which is book your discovery call. I have a secondary one on the left of that, which is coaching and branding. So both of them are links. And then a tertiary one, which is the hamburger type of element with the two lines, that's called a hamburger, and that actually opens up to become a slide out option. So I like hiding a lot of the other things that aren't really places where I want people to go. I know that I want people to look at my services and then book a call. So this is the tertiary menu. So when people click on that hamburger icon, it slides out and it shows the other information that I provide, or the other top links that people tend to click on. So this is just an example of how you can really create intention with the navigational menus and structures for your site, so that you're not overloading people with too much information. Even the tertiary menu, there is a lot of information on here, but the way that you've grouped these together helps people understand that there is a hierarchy in the structure. So the first four links, portfolio, intuition, journal, podcast, and about, those are the things that people click on a lot. So therefore they have more of they're higher up in the hierarchy. And then the other links are below that, and they're a little bit smaller in size and not as prominent. And then the footer, so this is the other tertiary navigation system, I tend to have a lot of information, a lot of pages on my website. So here's how I've organized that in the footer. And that just helps people navigate. Once they get to the bottom of the page, they might not want to click all the way up the top, but they can still find everything that they need to in the footer. And the way that I've structured it is I've put them into categories. So resources and support, branding and design, intuition and coaching. It's in separate categories to help people get to the information, get to the link that they need to get to first, second, and third. Great. So responsiveness for mobile. If a website isn't mobile friendly, 50% of users will use it, less even if they like the business. So this was a survey done with Google, and that is really interesting because you want to make sure that nowadays with your website, it has to be responsive because so many people are on their phones. So it adds even more complexity to the design process in a way because you have to design for the different sizes. There's typically 3 to 4 different sizes that you might work with. So you might work with mobile, tablet, laptop, and desktop. But if I said to make things simple, I would say keep it at desktop and mobile. Make sure that you've got at least those 2, and then that's probably bare minimum. I would definitely recommend mobile in that. And you want to know whether your text and your design are working on the various display sizes. So sometimes if you're designing for a desktop and it translates poorly into mobile, your text can be really small or difficult to read, or it could be really large and too large that people can't read it properly. So you want to make sure that you're keeping your text at a readable and comfortable size when it comes to mobile design, and that your design is stacking in a way where it makes sense for mobile navigation as well. So hover states are really important to know because hover states don't work on mobile. So you need to find an alternative for buttons or images that might have a hover state for your mobile. So most buttons are fine because people can see that it is a button and they just need to click on it. But sometimes images tend to have, on websites, you might have an image with a button hovering state. So if you hover over the top of an image, it can creates a button or it converts into a button. You want to make sure that that isn't happening on a mobile because people won't be able to click on it. And I would recommend a maximum of 2 columns on mobile. So I'll show you what that means when I say columns. But this is an example of the hover state on my website. So if you hover over one of those images, this is part of the portfolio, it converts into what you see on the right, which is a hover state. It shows you the project name and it has a button to say view portfolio piece. But on mobile, if people can't actually hover over that and there's no hover state, then what I've done is actually remove the hover state and made it so that it just comes with the link underneath the image. So that's a really simple alternative to the hover state for this particular, for the mobile experience. So people can still get in and view the portfolio, but they don't need to know that it can't be hovered on or hovered on, however you say that. Here are some other examples of menus in mobile. So typically a menu will slide out because having a navigation bar, which is very long on a desktop, is not going to work on a mobile format or mobile device. So you want to make sure that you've designed your menu so that there is some sort of slide out function, or that it is arranged in a way that is pleasant to use and easy to use when people are looking at it at a small screen. And also see that the size of the fonts are a little bit larger as well to help readability. So there are a few options there. And then you want to make sure that your boxes and your grids are kind of stacking on top of each other. In the website version, this will likely have the image first and then the text underneath. But in this particular case, they're putting the text and the image side by side. So this is the example on the left where it says Toro Yi Moi, the new single Buffalo. So this is an example of a 2-column grid. So it goes into 2 columns when you're designing in mobile. So I wouldn't recommend anything more. So I wouldn't squeeze in any additional columns because you're going to get too, especially with text. Images, it's okay, but with text, I think 2 columns is probably the max amount of columns you want. Otherwise, your text becomes very squished and you can't read anything. So the other version on the right-hand side, you can see that the text is actually sitting underneath the image. So they've done that probably because the image itself is really provocative and they want to give that a little bit more hierarchy than the text. Whereas the one on the left, the first thing I kind of look at is I'm really drawn to the title of the text for the blog post. So depending on what you want people to look at first will determine how you're going to arrange this information in mobile mode. Yeah, so Matt said something really interesting because he says small text in a button kills him on his phone because he's finding it really hard to actually tap the buttons in the right way. So that's great to know because sometimes you do need to make buttons a lot larger on mobile because people need to interact with it. They need to tap it. So Yvonne says, why do you have the secondary before the primary? Okay, the secondary before the primary. For me, it was just something that I typically see when we look at a navigation bar. When we look at a navigation bar, typically our eye goes right to the end and then it reads back. So that's why the secondary menu is before the primary. So hopefully that makes sense. So she's talking about the button in my navigation bar, and the navigation bar has the button right at the end, and then the secondary sort of smaller links towards on the left of that. So that's the reason why I think it's great to align it on the right, whereas having it floating in the middle, it's hard for your eye to grasp. Your eyes tend to grasp either on the left or on the right when it comes to the menu systems. So that's why I've got it on the right. Cool. Yeah, great questions, everyone. It's really, really good questions. And I think it definitely helps everybody else out as well. So the last stage is around testing. So know that 85% of UX related issues can actually be detected by performing usability testing on a group of 5 people. And that was actually the same as using 15 to 20 people. So you don't need a huge sample size to get a good test. It is actually really doable even if you use 5 people to survey and see what they're finding as big issues or things that they're finding really confusing on your website. So it's just a very practical thing to add to the end of your process is just to send your website to a few of your ideal customers. Ideally, it's your ideal customers rather than your friends or your family, because they're the ones that are going to be using the site in a way that makes sense for them. And understanding that continuous improvement and refinement is a natural and necessary part of running your business. So even though you've done the testing, it's good to do the retesting and refinement every time you make a change. This does get a little bit like there are lots of steps, I guess, to this because you're always testing and refining, but it should be a natural part of our business, I think. If you have the time, it should be something that we ideally prioritize, because we're always going to make positive changes, hopefully, to how our websites are running for our customers. And one thing to really note is site loading time. This is something that I need to work on my site as well. It's reducing the size and the amount of images will definitely help you with site loading time. So I would recommend using SVG. So SVG is great if you've got a vector-based logo or icon. It is super small and super compact in size, and it keeps the quality of the vector image, no matter what size you make it on your website. So SVG is definitely my go-to. But to export SVG, or having that SVG file, can be a little bit tricky. You can do it if you're using Figma, Adobe XD, or Sketch. That is something that you can do via those programs pretty easily. Or if you're working with a designer, make sure you ask for your icons and your logos in SVG. And you're always going to want to use JPEGs versus PNG. PNG looks great, but it takes up probably about 3 times, 4 times the amount of space in some cases. So you always want to use JPEG where possible. And I always convert or compress my images. You could either use JPEG Mini if it's JPEG, or if you're really wanting to use a PNG file, you should use PNG, and that's free. JPEG Mini is not free though. So it's good just to compress your images, because it can reduce the images by maybe 60% in some cases, and this will make a big change, big impact on your site loading time. So you want to get that site loading time to as low as possible. Something around 5 seconds is good. If you could get it down to 3 seconds, that would be amazing. And you can go on websites that will tell you the site loading time of your website. So you just type it in and they'll give you the statistics on how fast it's loading and how big your images are and how much time it's actually taking to load those images. So the results from testing and refinement, I noticed actually a 200% increase in the number of signups. So people using the form has been really good. There has been a definite increase in the number of people opting in to the free offer or the free resource that I've put into my website. So that's been a good change. And visitors are getting to the places that they need to. It's a lot clearer for people to navigate as well. Things to improve, this is stuff that I'm wanting to test and refine in future, is to work on the loading time, the Google ranking with more content. So content helps Google ranking and SEO, and keeping people on the site longer. Again, producing a lot of content will do that, because people are going to your site to read blog posts and things like that. So those are just some of the things specific to my business, but it's good to see, hopefully it's good to see how I've kind of gone through my process, and hopefully it shows you how you could step through your process as well. So Joyce is saying she uses WebP for images and it has made a big difference. Yeah, great. I haven't used WebP before, but that's great. That's really good that you're able to reduce the size of it and you're noticing the changes on your website. So that's awesome. Okay, so here is a UX checklist. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. But again, you'll have this checklist after this session is finished. So it's just a few general principles for interaction design. So when we're looking at your website, we want to ensure that your visibility, so this is called visibility of system status. So you want to make sure that people know where they are. So if there is a link that they're on, you want them to know that they're on the home page using, maybe you've got a title or something to show people where they are currently on the page. You could have an active link for your navigation bar to show them where they are. This is also like seen in maps with the "you are here." Or if you're submitting a form, you have a prompt that says your form is being submitted. this could be a page loading wheel. Sometimes you see an animation. So it just communicates to your user what is happening to them, so they know and understand what's happening to their experience in that moment. The second point is match between system and the real world. So this means not getting overly fancy or out there with things that you want people to interact with. So you can be really creative with images. You can be really creative with some of the different aspects of your site, such as textures and your copy and things like that. But when it comes to things like a button, you really want to make sure that it makes sense for people already. So if your button is green, most people are going to assume that that means correct. You're not going to use a red button for something that means it's correct. You'll want to keep things really easy to understand. This is really about conveying information in the quickest way possible, using icons that make sense. So if it is, imagine if you saw like a toilet icon that looked completely different, looked like a house, you wouldn't know how to get to the toilet, right? It doesn't make sense. So that's why we want to mimic those systems that you see in the real world on your website as well. And user control and freedom. So you want to include cancel, back, close buttons, especially GDPR, like a checkbox. Having compliance with like cookies, you want people to be able to check or close something. So if there's a pop-up, you want people to be able to click close on it or click back. If they're in your shop and they want to go back or cancel an order, you want to give them freedom, because that creates trust. If you lock these systems, then there is going to be no trust, and people are going to find it really hard to navigate through your site if they take the wrong steps. So user control and freedom is really key here. Consistency and standards. Make sure that your navigation typically is on the top, your footer is on the bottom. You have things such as your buy now button actually means buy now, communicating what having a subscribe button for your newsletter versus something that might be really confusing to understand. So make sure that you have those consistent throughout your website, that you're not changing your terminology too much. You can be interesting and different, but make sure you keep it in mind in terms of the fact that it still needs to communicate things very clearly to other people. And you want to be able to show that there are errors if something is happening. So if there is an error or someone's made a mistake, they can undo something, or you're going to take out options. So there is a fade on options that aren't necessary. So a lot of these typically will be built into the systems that you use already. So if you're using WordPress, Squarespace, Wix, Webflow, a lot of these will be designed into the web hosting platforms that you're using. So you don't have to think too much about these, but it's just good to understand where they're coming from and why they're important. You want to be able to show that if someone's coming to your site, recognition rather than recall is going to do better for you. So FAQs versus getting people to think of questions that they need answers to is an example of that. So if someone's already seeing some frequently answered questions, it's going to prompt them. You don't want them to recall information in order to move through your site. So autofill is a good example of this. Having options where people can select in a form is great, rather than getting people to type out long answers. You may also like those related links and related blog posts are good, because it makes it easy for people to choose what they're going to go to next. And then the last 4 is flexibility and efficiency of use. So having shortcuts, quick links if people have come to your website often, having swipe gestures if it's an app, that kind of thing is really good for people who are used to using your website. This is really important for shops as well, having like items that you've already bought in the past, something we see this in some of the shops like Amazon, or some of like even the Woolworths app has this. Like, you've already purchased this, so you can add it really easily the next time. Aesthetic and minimalist design is ensuring that you're removing clutter and what is not essential. So make sure you have another place to put that information, and using images might be better than using a whole paragraph of text, or using bullets rather than a whole paragraph of text. And number 9 is something that I find really exciting, actually, because it is something that people don't really design. So that 404 page is really key. You can really design that so that you're guiding people back to their quick links or the places that you think that they need to go next. So if you have a 404 page, maybe think about designing that so that you offer them a few options. Like, did you want to go home? Do you want to see the portfolio? Do you want to see the products? Do you want to contact me? Give them a few options so that they don't have to just go back and then click again. And help and documentation. So FAQ, help desk, contacts, contact form, all of that is really important as well. So that just means that if people need to come to your site and they're not sure what to do, there is always an option for them to get in contact with you or to get help. So all of these tips, these 10 tips, allow for accessibility, allows for you to create trust, and allows for you to create a clear communication or convey your information really clearly to your audience and to your user. So if you're able to think about it in terms of this, then it's going to help you a lot when it comes to designing your website. So we've got a few little things here that I want to see if you can get right, and it's okay if you get them wrong, of course, but it just teaches, sees if you can test your knowledge around UI, because we're going to go into some of the fundamentals in a little bit. So what's the correct image? So left or right? So if you were choosing the left image, you would be right, because obviously that looks a lot more cohesive. The icons on the top are not in a wonky sort of space. There is consistency in the font, and there is contrast in the text as well. It is also using color in the right way. So the version on the left is using color in the right way. And Matt just asked a question about 404 pages. So when does someone, so 404 pages is like when someone's made an error and they can't find the page, they end up on this page cannot be found. That's a 404 page. Great. Okay, so depending on time, I might skip a few and then we'll see where we get to at the end, but all of the notes are there because if you guys have questions, it'll be great just to allow a little bit of time for questions, but we'll see how we go. So hierarchy is really key to design. Everything in terms of design comes from hierarchy and having strong visual hierarchies. So if you're creating information that all looks the same, there is nowhere that you're guiding someone's eyes down the page. Everything looks like it's weighted the same as everything else. So nothing is more important, nothing is less important. Hierarchy is key to understanding exactly where someone needs to go when they come through your page. Here's another example of hierarchy. With boxes, you can see that the bigger the box is, and if it's up the top, it typically has more prominence, and it's going to help people anchor their vision to that space first, and then they're going to go down. So when people read a website, they typically go from left to right and then down the page. So that's just something to keep in mind. So whether one of the questions to ask yourself about your website is whether there is strong visual hierarchy. And here are the different things that we can look at when it comes to hierarchy on your website. So you've got typography, color, contrast, size, negative space, alignment, and repetition. Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Matt. Thank you for answering those questions and being super helpful. So with typography, best practice is to use no more than 3 font families. I would actually recommend 2 font families. For most cases, actually do a very good job. 3 font families are also fine, but I don't think you need to overcomplicate this in terms of choosing the right typefaces for your website. You would need 1 main font. So I would use this as so H1, H2 is heading 1, which is the title. Heading 2 is the subtitle. Heading 3 is the subtitle under that. Sorry, there's a typo. Heading 4 is the subtitle under that. So you'll have 1 main font and then 2 highlights or accent font styles. So, and after that, you'll have 1 body copy as well. So if you're able to create some sort of styling, you'll only need to create 4 different styles, and that should allow you the flexibility to create enough distinction for the different headings on your website. So some of the tips would be to make sure that your body font is legible and easy to read. This is a big one. Don't use script for body font. Choose fonts which have a big family because they give you different weights to play with, and there's consistency and cohesion with big family fonts. So Helvetica is an example of a family font. There's lots of weights. It goes from light to semi-bold to regular, book, heavy, black. So there's lots of different weights for the font. Changing the weight or italicizing it can actually give you more options if you need to. So if you want to use heading 5, heading 6 on your website, which isn't often needed, but you could do that by just changing the weight or italicizing some of the fonts. Script fonts should be used sparingly and avoid having too many really loud fonts. Just keep that for your main font, for your heading 1, and then make everything balance around that. So you don't want too many, I guess, loud fonts because they're all going to be competing with your attention. So this is an example. So the first where it says display, that is your heading font. So that typically is the largest type styling, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. For me, sometimes I have heading 2 as even the bigger is larger in size. It's just really for you to use it once on a page. Once per page is how often you should be using your heading 1 font. And it's really for SEO so that when Google reads it, they can actually see what that page is about. If you use it too much, it dilutes the Google searches. So use it once. And then you can see that the way that this particular example has done the font, they've allowed for some of the subtitles and the accents to be a little bit smaller. So the next thing you're actually going to read is probably after best in travel, you're going to read Copenhagen, Denmark, and then you might read the first city to visit and then the body copy. So again, it allows for some flow of hierarchy on your page. So as an example, I've actually used, this is an example of the H4 text, H3 and H5 text. So I'm using my body text alongside that, and that's just how I've laid out some of that information. So there should be a lot of spacing around the paragraphs, and I'm trying to make sure that people aren't reading too many things and that there is enough of a break between the paragraphs so that people know that they need to take action at each point. So that's how you would typically break up some of the longer pieces of content. And then color is something that is really important when it comes to UI design, because it creates emotional connections for people. There is an emotional resonance when people see color. So you can do this in terms of your brand colors, but it's good just to understand that different colors will create maybe a different emotion in some people. Or if it is related to an industry, so for example, if it's eco-friendly, typically you'd think of green. And in these cases, you would want to maybe link color back to something that is related back to your industry or niche. So that's how you would use color. Color palette must-haves. You want to start with your brand color. So define your brand's main primary color for consistent recognition. And then you're going to choose an accent color, which highlights your brand. So this could be used on a button to draw further attention. It could be used on subheadings just to give it a little bit of a pop. And you're going to also have functional colors. You're going to have one light neutral color for your backgrounds. This could be white or cream. It typically is going to be earthy and just a neutral color that people can read off really easily. And then you have a functional color, which is opposite that for text. So that's for your body text. So black, charcoal, dark gray, for example, that has high contrast. And you can use color wheels to find the complementary colors. So there's different ways of finding complementary colors. So this just gives you a little bit more of an idea. If you're starting from the one color, what would your accent color be? And what are some of the things that might look cohesive and aesthetically pleasing using the harmony wheels? And this is an example of the colors that I've used for my website and where I've used them. So primary brand colors, I've used them in the headings, the buttons and the links and the icons and the backgrounds as well. And I have two primary colors. I have accent colors, I have 3. So again, you could use as many as you want, but I think to simplify it, you would start with one primary color and one accent color. You can add more if you need to, or if you would like to, but it's not necessary. In my case, I have. And for the accent colors, I've used it on subheadings, buttons, links, backgrounds, and icons. And then I've got my neutral colors below that as well. So hopefully that gives you an example of how I've actually created some of the color combinations for my website. So another test, I've got a few of these typed in to our examples. So which one is the right one? Which one is the correct or the correct UI? So if you said the right one, you would be right, because obviously we would associate red with hanging up, and blue typically doesn't mean anything on like a phone. So we would say that would be the incorrect one because it doesn't really tell me anything. Red definitely makes me think that I need to hang up or cancel a call. And which one is the correct one? So you can invite other group members to this conversation. So there's invite friends. There's 2 buttons. Which one would you pick? So the left or the right? Yeah, you guys are getting all of these right. So if you picked the left one, you would be correct. So the reason why you'd want to pick the left one is because of hierarchy. So if you put both colors, even though they're consistent, the one on the left shows you where you need to click first. That's primary. And skip is probably a secondary option. So you don't want people necessarily to think that has the same hierarchy as the first button. Great. So one thing just to keep in mind is accessibility with your website. So you want to make sure that your colors are accessible for people who might have a vision impairment or might have color blindness. So this is a really great website just to run your colors through to see if there's enough contrast, if it passes the test. And I think accessibility is really important because it's not just about color, but it's also about understanding and making sure that your text has enough spacing around it so that it's easy to read. If there's too much clutter in your text, if it's too tight together, it's really hard for people to read if they've got dyslexia, for example. Foreground and background color needs to have high contrast. And you should also add in alt tags for your images. So these are these little tags that you can type into your website to tag your image so that people who can't see it might be able to read it, or they might be able to get the audio translation of what that image is. Things like transcripts, subtitles for your videos if you have them on your website, or having an audio file to download in addition to a video if you have that on your website is really important as well. Prominent interactive elements like having buttons so people can actually push it easily and get to them easily is really important, especially on mobile too. Forms that are clearly labeled, because sometimes people need to know what they're signing up for. So that is something that's really something to think about as well when it comes to your forms. And the other thing is the reason why forms need to be clearly labeled, this is more about whether it has the name or your address, like what that tag looks like, just because not everyone is able to read inside the forms. So you need almost a backup system to make sure that people can read it if it's not inside that little form box, because sometimes those form boxes have a background and it's not high contrast, particularly with the placeholder text. And don't use color alone for differentiation. Always use text to accompany it. So this is an example would be in the buttons. Always have text with your buttons, obviously, so that people aren't just choosing based on color alone. The third one is contrast. So if you looked at this, I think the main thing that you would notice in terms of contrast would be the red and the black. Huge contrast. And then also the background being a very stark, sort of flat gradient color with flat gradient doesn't make sense. Sorry. So just like a block color at the back, and having the image of the girl in the foreground, there is contrast in terms of depth. There is also contrast with the word discover, that's really large, versus the finer text, which is small. So contrast can actually exist in many different forms when we actually analyze it on something that's visual. You can also have contrast when it comes to your text weights. So when you have different text stylings, you would want to skip a weight so that there is enough contrast between using regular for your body text and maybe bold for your accents or your subtitles. If you use medium and it looks the same, there's not enough contrast from the weight for that to be easily differentiated. So that's just something to keep in mind. Always skip a weight. That's just the general rule. And then when it comes to contrast, the opposite can happen when you have too much contrast, because pure white on pure dark can actually cause eye fatigue. So if you've got a dark background, make sure you use 90% opacity with your whites so that it actually helps people read it without eye fatigue. So speaking of contrast, this one should be easy. Which one is the correct one? So obviously, I hope everybody got the gist of the contrast bit. It should definitely be left because we can barely read the text on the right? It's so blurry and it fades in. So that's an example of where contrast is really important. And we need to also think about it in terms of image as well, because maybe the contrast in this case is asymmetry, having some things left aligned and really sort of at the very large on the left side, and having a section of the website which is quite spacious and small and quiet on the right. That also creates contrast as well. So there's lots of different ways that you can create contrast on your website. It's not just making something big and making something small, but it's the placement of everything, and it keeps it interesting. Scale is the next one. So having something that is large is going to be more prominent. So your heading 1s will be really prominent and large, and your headings 2s will typically be a little bit smaller. Although that I would say is not always correct. It depends on your own choice, whether you want heading 1 to be larger than heading 2. But generally, for most websites, this is how it's run. When it comes to scale, it will obviously take your eye towards the things that are larger. So that bike, also contrasted against the background, has a lot more hierarchy than the text or that body text on the left. So you're going to look at that last. You're going to look at the bike and the image of the bike first. Then you're going to look at the image, the text, the 2019 Trek Midome SLR. You're going to look at that after that. And then the add to cart, I think, is pretty prominent. That bright red is very distinctive. Contrast again, size again, or scale, all speaks to hierarchy. So ask yourself when you go through your website, are you using scale and contrast in the right way? Are you creating hierarchy in the best way possible to guide people's eyes through your site? And which one is the correct one, left or right? Yeah, you guys are doing so well with these answers. I'll have to do harder ones next time. This one is a little bit tricky. So we're talking about scale. Yeah. So the one on the right is correct because the scale of the icon is more in alignment, more cohesive with the text. The one on the left doesn't really allow enough spacing, so it looks a little bit too prominent in this particular case. So I wouldn't say that that icon needed to be so prominent. So that's why the one on the right is the correct answer here. Great. And what about this one? So this is a product shot. Which one is the correct one? This one is an interesting one because the left one is obviously the correct answer because it scales the image so that it is flush with the edges, so it doesn't have that awkward negative spacing around it. But sometimes maybe it blocks out the whole image as well. The photography doesn't show the whole product on the left. So I'd still say it's the left, but I think maybe they needed to design it so that people could see it without covering the rest of the product, because that would be important as well. All right, spacing. Now, spacing allows for readability and the ability to make sense of information in groups. What do I mean by that? Grouping things close together creates a stronger relationship. So putting a heading with a button or text with a button nearby creates that relationship. Putting things far away creates a disassociation to that relationship. There's less relationship if they're spaced out. So in this particular example, spacing is really effective in that it creates a bit more aesthetic space. What you can see though is that there is a little bit more spacing between the text and the image on the bottom. So the bottom image is obviously the right one, so the correct version, because it's got more spacing around it. But what we can see is that the heading and the body copy are kind of close together. They're sort of in a group, and then the image is by itself. So it shows you that you have to read the copy with the heading together, and the image is kind of something a little bit, it's not seen in that particular group as such. It's really subtle. This is a really subtle art in terms of design, so I find it incredibly exciting. But it allows you to understand the importance of certain groups of elements. And so this is another example on my website. It's probably a little bit easier to understand, but I've grouped them based on what they're about. So resources and support, I have all the links under that. So that's obviously a grouping by itself. And then there's a big gap between that and then the next group, which is branding and design. And then after that, you've got a tight group of the icons, the social media icons on the left. So they're grouped together. And in that way, you can see the structure, or you can see the relationship between different items because they're grouped together and because they're close together as well. Alignment and layout. So this is really about looking at how people are going through your site. So are people reading your site from using a Z layout, or are they using the F layout to read your site? So for most landing pages, home pages, pages with minimal text, lots of contemporary layouts use a Z layout. So their eye goes from left to right, so they ping back, and then they sort of, so the things that are really important tend to be on the corners, the top left, top right corner, bottom left, bottom right corner. So there's that Z way of their eyes moving about the page. So if your page doesn't have a lot of text, then you would typically choose the Z layout. Otherwise, you would go for the F layout. So this is really good for sales pages with a lot of text. And there tend to be longer pages, blog posts, anything that has a lot more clutter on it. Typically, people would read that with a F layout. Yeah, and then alignment and layout allows for repetition, familiarity, and flow. It allows for enhanced readability and navigation. So generally, we would prefer left-aligned text. So if you have a lot of body text, paragraphs of text, this is best with a left alignment because our eyes tend to ping back to the same spot. Whereas if you have to get people to read a big chunk of text that is centered text, so that's text that's sort of like in the middle, that's really hard. That's really difficult for your eye to go back because it has to find where the start of that next line is. And that takes a bit more time. So it slows down readability of your text. And things that aren't aligned will actually stand out more. So maybe sometimes you want to put buttons in a bit of a weird position, like a submit button at the end of the form tends to be on the right-hand side, bottom right, rather than left, because it stands out more. And people have written everything and then they're ready to move on. So there is a reason why those buttons are on the right. And we typically want to ensure that text is less than 7 to 9 words per paragraph for readability. If it's a little bit longer, it's okay, but you just don't want people to read from one side of your website to the other side before they have to get back to the same line, because that's really difficult for your eye to follow. typically with this, your maximum website should be about 1200 pixels wide on a desktop. So that means you'll have a lot of spacing on big screens, which is okay, but it keeps people's view centered within that space where they can easily move their eyes for readability. So that's 1200 pixels. Left alignment is preferred. Examples, the one on the left is left aligned. Most of the text, the icons are all left aligned. As you can see, there's nothing centered about it. And then what you can see, which is really interesting, is that you've got icons and elements, not icons, sorry, the image of the little circular image is on the right and the button is on the right. So the reason why they've done the button on the right is because it breaks up that familiar pattern of everything going down on the left. It interrupts the flow. And it's a big, bold red button. So it's very clear that you have to click on that button. So Airbnb said that once they redid their UX, they noticed like massive improvements in their website conversions. And I'm not surprised because their website is really effectively designed. So the one on the right is an example from my website. So this is an example of having things on the centered text, right? Everything going to the center. This is good if you've got short pieces of text or it's punchy quotes, things like that can be centered. Text testimonials, short testimonials can be centered. And then the last one is repetition. So this can be applied to things such as button styling, font styling, icon styling, grids, and layouts. So yeah, so Elizabeth said, do you mean 7 to 9 words per line or per paragraph? 7 to 9 words per line. So 7 to 9 words, and then you start the next line. Just so you keep your paragraphs, the width of your paragraph is really short so that your eye doesn't have to travel too far. That's the main aim for this. If your eye is traveling from one side to the other side, it has to make its way back. It sounds weird, but it has to make its way back to find the starting point again. So the shorter the lines are in your paragraphs, the easier it is. I hope that answered the question, Elizabeth. So grids, and in terms of layouts, repeated objects, repeated spacing, all of this creates cohesion and a structure so people know what to expect from your website as they're moving through it. You are creating a design ecosystem that people are going to feel like they can trust because there isn't something really wacky that sort of pops out of nowhere. You can have elements of that, but you just want to balance that by also having gridded and structured elements. So this is an example of how I've laid out my site. I've used the grid spacing repeatedly on my site, but I've also, on the examples on the right, I've used some of the text in a particular way. I've done those paragraphs and the layouts in a way where there is consistency. There's the icon, the heading, the subtext, and then the copy or the body text. So all of that is a repeated structure. I've used these throughout my site on a number of pages. So it just makes your job a little bit easier once you've got these layouts. You can kind of repeat them. And here's another example of cohesion and repetition in design. Which one is correct? This one is a little bit easier, I think. So hopefully you all said the right one was correct. Mainly, it's hard to see, but it's mainly because the button, the styling on that button, the edge is round in the same way. So there's the same amount of curvature here. Whereas the button on the left is really not very clear because there's not enough contrast. But the button on the left actually doesn't have the same amount of curvature. And the other thing that you can see is the information on the top, the icons on the top. There's inconsistent spacing with that, the one on the left, the sort of pizza wedge shape is a lot further out than the other icons. So that doesn't make sense either. Ooh. Okay, so next one. This one's really tricky actually, but which one is the right one? I'll give you a few more seconds with this one. So hopefully what you'll notice is that when I ask you these questions, most of the UI and the UX side of things should feel fairly natural. And that's because it's working with human psychology. It's basic human psychology in terms of how we move about the world. So you should already have all of this within your systems already, because this is how we naturally see the world, how we interact with it. Yeah, great. Yeah, that's perfect. So the one on the left, even though the icons look similar in shape, the ones on the left are consistent because they're all filled in. So cohesion of those icon shapes is what we're looking for here. Okay, just to summarize everything before we close up, and we've got a few minutes for questions at the end, which is good, is hierarchy. So we want to look at typography, color, contrast, size, negative spacing, alignment, repetition when it comes to hierarchy. So keep that in mind. Move through your site and do an audit of your own site. That will be the task that I'll give you today to do, and see what things need to be changed. What are the things that could be improved to create more hierarchy in a way that helps your site flow and answer the questions that your ideal user or your user might need to have answered before they click to purchase. How do you guide your user through the site in the most efficient way possible for them? So high priority items are larger headings, bolder buttons, more negative space. So active space is that sort of space around an image. Passive space is the spacing between like lines of text, because we don't notice it as much. So you use more negative space to draw attention to things. Big sections, horizontal sections of your website is really good for capturing attention. High contrast, having things at the top of your page, above the fold, or top of the fold, front and center. That's where most of your eyes will start when it comes to your website. Low priority items tend to be smaller paragraphs of text, having links instead of buttons, using passive space, so adjusting the space between paragraphs, between a paragraph and a heading, that's the passive space. Smaller sections of grids creates that feeling of something being a lower priority rather than having it be a header or a banner, for example. Lower contrast in your colors and your scale, and having like things further down the page like a footer is going to be lower priority items. So that's just the general structure for hierarchy. And in summary, so for today, we went through the 4 steps for UX and UI. We looked at step 1, research, step 2, ideation, step 3, design and prototyping, step 4, testing and refining. And we did the checklist, the UX checklist, which is the 10 things, the UI fundamentals for hierarchy, so that you could do the audit for your own site. And I promised you a free worksheet at the end. So this is the link. I'm going to put it into the chat. So just give me a second while I grab the link. And then if you guys have any questions at the moment, type them into the chat box. We've got about 10 minutes before we have to wrap up, but the link is up in the sticky, at the top of the chat box, I should say. So let me know if you can access that, you'll have to make a copy of it because it's a questionnaire, a worksheet. So there's space for you to write in. So just click make a copy when you see that link, and it should take you to the Google Sheet or the Google Worksheet. So let me know if that works for you. And are there any questions on what we've covered today or on anything UX, UI related? Arena says, can you use Wix for e-commerce without using Shopify? I'm not sure, Arena. I don't actually work on Wix. I'm not sure if anyone has the answer for Wix. If you use Wix, that would be great. I'm not sure. I know some platforms need you to use an external e-commerce option. So maybe Wix is one of those. I know the other one is Showit, and Showit you also need an external e-commerce link to Shopify. Thank you, Andrew. I'm glad that you found it helpful and that you found the session good. Yvonne says, is there a recommended minimum font size for accessibility? I would say a visible font size. I'm using 16 pixels for my website. And then I think it's 17 pixels or 15 pixels. I can't remember which one. I'm sticking to around 16 pixels for mobile as well. I don't know if there is a minimum font size, but I think if you're standing like away from your computer, generally I see whether I can read everything appropriately, and that's how I'm judging it for myself at the moment. But yeah, that's a really great question. I'm going to research this because I'm sure someone would have definitely created some rules for minimum font size. And thanks, Andrew, for sharing the test site. That's great. Yeah, for speeding, for your speed tests, that's great. That's really good to keep an eye out on, as well as you add information and change information over time. Carrie says, great info. Any advice regarding platforms? We currently have Weebly, but set up by someone. Is WordPress the best platform for a consultancy type business? I think it's really dependent on how much you want to get into your platforms. I find WordPress really difficult in that it has, personally for me, because if I'm working with clients, I need to make sure that they're always updating their information and their plugins. And that's just not the best way for me to continue working with them, for me to have to check back and forth just to make sure that their websites are updated. So I typically recommend, and this is a personal choice for my clients, I would typically recommend either Squarespace if someone doesn't want to get too into the nitty-gritty of designing and tweaking their website. Squarespace is pretty user-friendly from that perspective. And then Webflow is the one that I actually love designing in, and I would highly recommend checking that out. It is a little bit more tech-heavy, and there is a steeper learning curve, but I definitely recommend that just because it allows you to do a lot more with your website. But with Shopify, you would definitely need something for Webflow because it doesn't have a very good product or shop e-commerce platform as yet. So it's very different. It just depends on what you need and how technical you want to be when it comes to your site. Dean, so there was an error with the link. Is anyone else finding? Okay, I'm gonna send through the error. Let me see if this works. I'll just try it again. Let me see if that works. Otherwise, if not, I'm going to update the link before I hand the notes over. So when you get the notes at the end, you'll have the correct link. So hopefully that works. With the error, it might be the fact that you need to copy. You have to say make a copy. But if not, I'll make sure it's sent in the notes and that you can access it without needing to copy it. Maybe that's why. Okay, great. Elizabeth says she's using WordPress but suspect from what you're saying that the theme is not flexible enough. Suggestions. Look, I think with WordPress, you'll find that there is a lot of flexibility because there are so many plugins and third-party options to customize WordPress. So I don't know if flexibility is the issue there. I think usability is probably the thing for me, that it is difficult to, I guess, it is not as user-friendly as some of the other ones. Shiva says the cheat sheet link. Cheat sheet will come with the full workshop presentation at the end, so you'll receive that afterwards. So that's okay. If you haven't taken notes, you'll still get everything that I've presented today in a PDF format. Great. Okay, so people seem to be able to access the link. All right, excellent. So I would say if you would like, this is an open invitation, but if you want to go through your website, do a full audit of it, and then later send me your website, send me your notes. If you would like any feedback, I'm happy to do that for you as well. There's not that many of you, so I'm happy to offer that as a bit of an audit service, just to review some of the things that you've done or some of the things that you've audited from your website. So if that would be helpful, get in touch. My contact details are in the worksheet, so right at the bottom. So that's how you can get in touch with me. And the other way that we could actually work together would be to do a mentoring session. So if you found this helpful and you would like me to actually spend 2 hours with you going through your site in detail, then that is definitely something that I love doing. I absolutely love the mentoring sessions. I get so much out of them as well. So I have a few spots left. So if anyone's interested, feel free to book in a spot with ASBAS. So it's 2 hours for $25. So usually my mentoring fees are around $200 per hour. So this is actually a really, really good deal for small businesses, and it's the initiative for helping businesses get back on track with COVID. So yeah, there you go. Anyway, hopefully everybody got something out of today's session. Thank you so much for being so patient and being so active and participatory throughout the session and the workshop. I really loved it. And yeah, if you have any other separate questions, my contact details are in the worksheet at the bottom of the worksheet. So please get in touch with me that way and I'll be happy to help you out. Awesome. Thank you so much. If there's no other questions, we'll start wrapping up. But thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks, Yvonne. I'm glad that you found it interesting and informative and enjoyable. Elizabeth, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Everybody was great at all the answers. You guys are amazing and very intuitive in knowing what is right and what was wrong. So I'm really, really impressed. Awesome. I'll speak to you soon next time for the next workshop, hopefully. And I hope you have a lovely day. Hopefully the weather is a little bit better after that. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.